This is a brief video about NATO and the reasons to join NATO and the reasons not to join NATO. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is an alliance which was formed in 1949 after the Second World War and has played a key role in the Cold War against the Soviet Union and its allies, winning the Cold War and bringing to the downfall of the Soviet Union, even if one has to consider that the victory over the Cold War was not a military one, but was an economical victory. NATO is composed by 30 member countries, 28 European, plus the United States and Canada. 2 more countries should be entering in the close future, as we all know, and these are Finland and Sweden. NATO is predominantly an American, a US organization, in the sense that the overall expenditure of NATO is 1.17 trillion US dollars. Of these 1.17 trillion US dollars, 811 are spent by the United States. The second spenders, the UK, will be spending only $72 billion. There is, however, an obligation of all NATO members to spend at least by 2025 2% of their GDP on weapons. At the moment, the United States spends 3.6% of its GDP in weapons, and only a few other countries of the NATO alliance actually satisfy this condition. NATO does not own any nuclear weapons. The idea is that in case of a nuclear war, what will happen is that the member states of NATO will take initiative and will use their own nuclear arsenal. To note, the nuclear arsenal is predominantly, once again, of the United States, that has 5,550 nuclear weapons in its control, of which 2,061 are active, whilst France has only 290 and the UK 255. As you can see, the predominant power behind NATO is the United States. This holds true also with the personnel that's active within NATO. NATO has a total of 3.32 million personnel which are active. Of these 3.32 million individuals, 1,351,000 belong to the USA. The second country that has most personnel after the USA is Turkey, with 445, and so on. As you can see, once again, the numbers prove that NATO is a United States alliance, where the main player is this enormous country, which is the United States of America. Even the military aircraft contribution makes it evidently that it's the USA that calls the shots. If you consider the number of military aircraft, 13,247 belong to the USA, and the second and third countries which contribute, which are Turkey and France, give only around 1,000 military aircraft each. Of course, the military alliance is made also by armored elements. There are around 130,000 armored vehicles of one type or another, mechanical armored vehicles of one type or another, and around 500 marine elements, of which we have 144 submarines. So it's a complete alliance which takes in consideration all elements, but leaves the decision of nuclear war, in a certain sense, in the hands of those countries which hold the nuclear weapons, for NATO in itself has no direct control over the nuclear usage. The NATO Nuclear Planning Group, which is chaired by the NATO Secretary General, permits some coordination between the countries which hold nuclear weapons and the countries that do not have their own nuclear arsenal. But the decision to use nuclear weapons is tied to the single nation states. As noted, it is an American, a US alliance, where the United States plays the main role. But what are the reasons for which a country should adopt a position in favor of NATO? I have identified 4 reasons. There might be more. The first obvious one is defense against the aggression of big powers like Russia and China. The second is that NATO can be a tool to bring nations under the sphere of influence of the United States and the West, one's own sphere of influence. The third is that NATO favors cooperation between its member states, between the nations. And the fourth reason, it gives a sense of security to the citizens of the countries that adhere to NATO. The reasons against is that belonging to NATO makes you a target of the enemies of NATO. The second reason against is that you have to spend a high proportion of your GDP to participate to NATO. 2% is considered to be high. The third reason is that it gears the society towards war and not peace. The fourth reason is that many nations find it hard to coordinate and keep cohesion. After all, NATO is one big commission, where the single members might fight and squabble. Let us now consider the reasons for one by one. Let us start with the first one. Defense against aggression of big nations like Russia and the new threat that has risen, which is China. Yes, China is considered to be a new threat by NATO. Initially, the alliance was geared against the Soviet Union. There was reason for this. You see, the issue is that if they start an alliance that is geared against China, specifically against China, on the one side, the European nations do not have interest in that geographical area. On the other side, it would have driven China towards Russia, and would have favored a stronger alliance between China and Russia, strengthening a world of blocs, which would have maybe brought to a higher risk of nuclear war. NATO is a tool that helps bring nations under the sphere of influence of the West. This is not only a military element, it is above all a cultural element. It permits the industries of the nations of the West to export their products, to secure that their ideas are furthered in other countries, which is why it is not limited to being a military alliance, but it is also a cultural alliance, which is what makes NATO particularly important to the single member states that belong to NATO. The military alliance gives a common purpose, a common enemy against which to fight, the Soviet Union. Even if the NATO states that it is only a defensive alliance, the only other big giants which can fight NATO are China and Russia. So they're the two main threats that NATO has. And the common purpose favors the cooperation between the member countries of the alliance. As always, the element which permits coalition and eliminating of conflict and fighting between the nations is a common enemy. So NATO favors the further cooperation, the cultural, the economical, the social cooperation between the member nations that belong to it. The fourth reason, as we pointed out, is that belonging to NATO gives a sense of security to the citizens whose nation belong to NATO. This sense of security favors peace and economic prosperity. One does not have to worry about a war with one's neighbor. The main concern is the big giant, which is Russia or China, but the small squabbles which might take place amongst neighbors which have characterized European history are no longer an issue with which the single nation has to worry about, and this gives peace to the citizens, which favors their growth and their prosperity. The reasons against are once again for those that are considered, of course. The first one is that belonging to NATO makes you a target of Russia and China, those opposing NATO itself. Now, this can create issues to one's companies, to one's industries. One adheres to one cultural bloc, one cultural economical bloc, and many possibilities are blocked in the opposing cultural economic bloc. So one's small businesses, small enterprises can no longer go with ease to Russia and to China to do business. The second reason against is that 2% of the GDP of a country is considered to be excessive by many. Many countries are against war, so they criticized government expenditure in weapons. This can create internal turmoil in a country. Not only resources which could be used for social programs would have to be diverted towards the military element. So 2% of GDP is considered to be excessive by many, which is a good reason not to participate to me. The third reason is that NATO gears society towards war and not peace. The idea is that peace brings prosperity. There where there is freedom given to the economic system can specialize in a way as to maximize the benefit and the prosperity of the community. There where instead it is focused towards aggressing another group like Russia or China, prosperity is no longer the main objective of the economic system, and the maximization of the benefit that a nation can give to its citizens is no longer optimal. It is minimized. Instead of producing televisions, food, and leisure, an economic system would start producing prevalently weapons and aggressive products. The fourth reason against that is considered is that wars are not won by commissions. And NATO is one big commission. The problem with commissions is that there where the fighting actually starts, there might be a lack of coordination, especially if things start to go wrong. There might be fights, internal fights in the commission itself, and this might lead to loss of coordination, loss of the capacity to act and work in harmony and to take decisions. So this is in part limited by the fact that who calls the shot in NATO is the United States. There is one central player which holds the main power, but nonetheless it is still a commission, and thus taking decisions can result difficult. Well, that's a quick overview of NATO, what NATO is all about, and the reasons for and the reasons against. I hope you formulated your own personal opinion with regards to what NATO is and how useful it can be. Please like the video, please subscribe so to receive more videos like this, and participate to the small community which we're trying to set up so that we can enjoy with pleasure each other's company. Well, that's all. Thank you for listening, and check out the other videos in the channel. Bye!